April 1861, the first shots fired at Fort Sumter marked the beginning of a brutal conflict that would tear the United States apart. Brother fought against brother, cities burned, and a nation was forever changed. But how did the Civil War begin? What were the key battles? And how did it ultimately redefine the future of America? Stay with us as we uncover the epic struggle of the American Civil War. Enjoying the journey through history? Make sure to hit that subscribe button and join our community of history enthusiasts. Don't forget to leave a comment below. Tell us what you think, share your favorite historical insights, or suggest a topic you'd love to see us explore. The road to war, a nation divided. By the mid-19th century, the United States was at a breaking point. The primary issue, slavery and states' rights. The northern states, industrialized and anti-slavery, clashed ideologically with the southern states whose economy relied on slave labor. Tensions escalated after the Missouri Compromise, 1820, and the Compromise of 1850, which attempted to maintain a balance between free and slave states. But it was the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, allowing territories to decide on slavery through popular sovereignty, that ignited widespread violence. This led to the bloody confrontations known as Bleeding Kansas. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected president on an anti-slavery platform. The South saw this as a direct threat. Within months, South Carolina seceded, followed by Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas. These states formed the Confederate States of America, led by Jefferson Davis. The Union, led by Lincoln, refused to recognize their legitimacy, and war became inevitable. The first shots, the Battle of Fort Sumter, April 1861. Fort Sumter, located in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina, became the flashpoint of the Civil War. This federal fort, manned by a small Union garrison under Major Robert Anderson, found itself surrounded by Confederate forces after South Carolina's secession in December 1860. As tensions mounted, President Abraham Lincoln faced a critical decision: resupply the fort or abandon it. Opting to send provisions but no weapons, Lincoln sought to maintain moral high ground while avoiding direct aggression. However, Confederate General P.G.T. Beauregard, who ironically had been one of Major Anderson's former students at West Point, viewed the resupply mission as an act of war. On April 12, 1861, at 4:30 a.m., Confederate artillery opened fire. The bombardment lasted for 34 hours, with shells raining down on the fort from all sides. Fort Sumter's defenders, vastly outgunned and running low on supplies, returned fire but inflicted little damage on the well-positioned Confederate batteries. The constant shelling illuminated the night sky over Charleston Harbor. Civilians gathered along the shoreline to watch, treating the battle like a grim spectacle. Witnesses described the scene as both mesmerizing and terrifying, as the booming cannons shattered the early morning silence. By April 13th, the fort's walls were crumbling and fires raged within its barracks. Realizing the hopelessness of the situation, Major Anderson surrendered. Remarkably, despite the intensity of the bombardment, there were no casualties during the battle itself, though 2 Union soldiers died during a post-surrender explosion while firing a ceremonial salute. The fall of Fort Sumter galvanized the North. Lincoln immediately called for 75,000 volunteers, and thousands answered the call. The South responded in kind, with Virginia, Arkansas, North Carolina, and Tennessee joining the Confederacy soon after. Fort Sumter was more than a military engagement. It was the spark that ignited the Civil War. The battle demonstrated the Confederacy's resolve to fight for independence and solidified the Union's determination to preserve the nation. Key battles and turning points. The First Battle of Bull Run, July 1861. The first major battle took place in Virginia. The Union expected a quick victory, but Confederate forces under General Thomas "Stonewall" Jackson repelled the attack. The chaotic Union retreat signaled that this would be a long and bloody war. The Battle of Antietam, September 1862. The bloodiest single day in American history saw over 22,000 casualties. Union General George McClellan halted Robert E. Lee's invasion of the North. Though the battle was technically a draw, it gave Lincoln the opportunity to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring enslaved people in Confederate states free. The Battle of Gettysburg, July 1863. In what became the turning point of the war, General Lee's Confederate forces clashed with Union troops under General George Meade in Pennsylvania. The three-day battle resulted in 50,000 casualties, and Lee's defeat ended the Confederacy's hopes of European support. Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, delivered months later, reaffirmed the fight for unity and democracy. Sherman's March to the Sea, 1864. Union General William Tecumseh Sherman launched a campaign of total war, marching from Atlanta to Savannah, destroying infrastructure, railways, and resources. This crippled the Southern war effort and hastened the Confederacy's collapse. The war's end, Appomattox, and the aftermath. By early 1865, the Confederacy was on the brink of collapse. Its economy was devastated, its infrastructure destroyed, and its armies were depleted. General Robert E. Lee, commander of the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia, faced immense pressure as Union forces, led by General Ulysses S. Grant, launched relentless assaults across Southern territory. The Union's successful siege of Petersburg in March 1865 was a pivotal blow. Petersburg, a critical supply center for the Confederate capital, Richmond, Virginia, fell after months of trench warfare. With Petersburg lost, Richmond was abandoned, and Confederate officials, including President Jefferson Davis, fled south. On April 2, 1865, Union troops entered Richmond, raising the U.S. flag over the Confederate capital. Civilians fled, and fires, some set by retreating Confederate forces, consumed parts of the city. The collapse of Richmond symbolized the inevitable end of the Confederacy. Lee, realizing his army could no longer continue the fight, retreated westward. His hope was to regroup with Confederate forces in North Carolina, but Grant's forces pursued him relentlessly. The Confederates, exhausted and starving, were cut off near the village of Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia. On the morning of April 9, 1865, Lee met with Grant to discuss terms of surrender. The meeting took place in the McLean House, a modest residence that would become etched in history. Grant, dressed in a muddy uniform, offered generous terms. Confederate soldiers would surrender their weapons, but they could return home with their horses and personal belongings. Officers were allowed to keep their sidearms. Lee, in full dress uniform, signed the terms. As he mounted his horse to leave, Union soldiers saluted him, acknowledging the dignity with which he had fought. This act symbolized the beginning of the reconciliation process. Though Lee's surrender marked the end of major military operations, the war was not entirely over. Other Confederate forces, such as those in Alabama and Texas, surrendered in the following weeks. The last significant Confederate force, led by General Edmund Kirby Smith, surrendered in Galveston, Texas on June 2, 1865. The human cost and national devastation. The Civil War was the deadliest conflict in American history, claiming over 620,000 lives, nearly 2% of the U.S. population at the time. Thousands more were maimed, and countless families were left mourning. The Southern economy lay in ruins. Railroads were destroyed, cities were burned, and farmland was devastated. The war's destruction caused widespread poverty and food shortages, particularly in the southern states. Reconstruction, a nation's struggle. With the war's end came the immense task of Reconstruction, rebuilding the South and integrating millions of newly freed African Americans into society. The 13th Amendment, ratified in December 1865, abolished slavery nationwide, but racial tensions remained high. President Lincoln, in his second inaugural address, had called for malice toward none and charity for all, emphasizing reconciliation. However, his assassination by John Wilkes Booth on April 14, 1865, just days after Lee's surrender, plunged the nation into uncertainty. Lincoln's successor, Andrew Johnson, faced intense political opposition over how to handle Reconstruction. His lenient policies toward former Confederate states angered radical Republicans in Congress who sought to guarantee civil rights for formerly enslaved individuals. The Freedmen's Bureau was established to assist newly freed slaves by providing food, education, and legal aid. However, Southern resistance to Reconstruction was fierce. The emergence of groups like the Ku Klux Klan sought to undermine progress through violence and intimidation. Economic and political shifts. The Civil War dramatically shifted political and economic power in the United States. The South's plantation economy collapsed, while Northern industry surged. The war also cemented federal authority over state governments, ending the debate over secession and states' rights. Politically, the war paved the way for significant constitutional changes. Alongside the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, 1868, granted citizenship to all individuals born in the U.S., while the 15th Amendment, 1870, prohibited voting discrimination based on race. These amendments laid the foundation for future civil rights movements. The legacy of the Civil War. The Civil War permanently reshaped the United States. Slavery was abolished with the 13th Amendment, 1865. The federal government's power was strengthened over states. The Reconstruction era, 1865 to 1877, saw efforts to rebuild the South, but racial tensions persisted, leading to segregation and Jim Crow laws. The war's impact is still felt today, shaping American identity, race relations, and political divisions. The Civil War may have ended in 1865, but its consequences would echo through the decades. How did Reconstruction change the South? What challenges did newly freed African Americans face, and how did the assassination of Abraham Lincoln alter the course of history? Stay with us as we explore the aftermath of the American Civil War. And if you know someone who would love diving into the past, share this video with them. Let's uncover history together.